you can read his bio on the ABC website. You know, Simeon Banister, like I say, you refer to Simeon in many ways as my younger brother, as my older brother, as my advisor, as my thought partner. Just a really, really, really good person. When we talk about partners in goods, bring him up. Turn the camera on this guy. Turn the camera on, Simeon. So. And today is Martin Luther King's birthday, and I asked Simeon a couple of months ago. Actually, I said, "Oh, when we looked at the calendar, I said, that third Thursday is MLK." I said, "Simeon, would you?" And I couldn't even get the rest of it. I said, "Of course I would." So, Simeon, good morning, welcome. I yield the floor to you, dear brother.
Good morning, Brother Jerome, and good morning to everybody that has joined us online virtually for this particular conference. Now, one of the things that Jerome talked about is the need for relationships and how critical relationships really are. And I put a big emphasis on relationships. I love to be in the room with folks, and so since we can't be in a physical room together, we are in a virtual room together. So I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things with this chat so that we know that we are here together. Hopefully, everybody can see the screen. If you want to just throw a little thumbs up in the chat to let me know that you can see the screen, that would just be so wonderful. And I see the thumbs up coming through. All right, so we're going to talk today about opportunity amidst the chaos that we are experiencing. But before we get into that part of our conversation, if you in the chat can just tell me what organization you're a part of, just drop it in the chat. What your organization's purpose is, and just in some super brief words, why you came to work there. Did you do it because you love the work? Did you do it because you needed the job? Did you do it because you believe in the mission of the organization? Just very quickly, I'm just gonna, if you can throw these in the chat, I'm just gonna read a couple of these as they come in. When was your organization established? What organization are you from? What's your organization's purpose, and why did you come to work there? Right. Let's see. And I'm not sure if can I see the chat? Yep, there we go. It's coming through. Urban League, 1965, from Sean L. Hawkins. James Norman was ran Action for a Better Community in such an august way. Serves on our board at the Community Foundation because he believes in the mission. Joanne said, "Listen, needed the job, love to help people, and believe in the mission." Annie's at Heritage Christian Services established in 84, supporting people to live lives of endless possibility. And she loves human services and supports those with the IDD diagnosis. Angie Perez Delgado, 1968, Ibero American Action League, uplift, empower, and advocate for Latinos and the underserved. And she does this because she loves our community. And so, as we read through some of these, and I encourage you to keep adding these to the chat, as we are thinking about the moment that we're in, we anchor ourselves to the purpose that we might have. I came to work at Rochester Area Community Foundation about now 8 years ago. And time really does fly. Our organization was founded in 1972. Our funds have grown here. We're about 1,600 funds. These days, charitable assets at actually a little north of this now, but at the time, $660 million. Permanently endowed assets of $510 million. And one of the key figures that is always critical for us is that we want to be getting more out into the community than we've taken in. And so we've been able, since 1972, our year of inception, to award $730 million. But I did not just come to the Community Foundation to work here for a job. And that is no knock for folks that are looking and need it. But here, our mission is centered on the idea that we have the chance to cultivate a greater Rochester region that is thriving, and not just for some, but for everybody. And that's a key part of who we are and who we see ourselves to be. What's interesting about that is that it certainly presents some challenges in a community like ours because of the history that we have. And many of us, we have been seeking systems change. And I'm sure a lot of folks have been to a lot of seminars in one place or another where you've seen this graphic, this upside down pyramid that describes the conditions of systems change, the things that we need to do, addressing policy and practices and resource flows and relationships and who holds power, and the mental models that keep all of this in place. Many of us have considered the possibilities of deep structural change and transformational change. And I think what's interesting about the moment that we're in now is that for the better part of my career, what I've seen is a community and, in fact, a society that's defined by inertia, difficult change to see change, difficult to make change, in part because of what we've been told about how the system functions and how it can or cannot change. And what we've seen recently is a whole lot of change. Certainly in this last year and a half, many of the things that we've taken for granted as things that cannot change have in fact been put on the table and have changed dramatically. Um, for most of us in ways that we find at best disturbing and at worst evil. I want to point out that the presentation name here was Opportunity Amidst Chaos. I mean, it's because you get up on a morning and you open your app or your paper and you read that Venezuela has been invaded. You open your paper or you open your favorite news outlet and you read that healthcare has been cut and is being cut. You open your paper or your favorite news outlet and you read that a woman has been shot in the face by ICE. That is chaos. It is chaos. And it feels like chaos. And it feels like there's a shock value that is at play that is intended to overwhelm us and to leave us feeling like there is nothing we can do, that we have been rendered powerless, that we have no way to stand up to the overwhelming level of activity and the consolidation of power that we are witnessing. And I came to tell you today that there is a strategy that is at play. I think many of you know this, that in order for us to accept what is happening, that we've got to forget about what has transpired in our past, that history literally has to be erased. And so it's not a surprise that with this set, the first thing that they moved to do was to erase history books, to remove the ability for us to be reminded that there are elements of this that we have in fact seen before. There is a term, a technical term. Many of us are familiar with the idea of history being things that happened in the past. But maybe we're not as familiar with the concept of historicity. Some of you may have heard me talk about this in other talks in the past, but it's such an important concept that I want to lift up here this morning. History for us is not just about history for us, rather, it's not just about what has happened and what's transpired. A lot of things have happened. I got up this morning, I put on a suit jacket and tucked in a pocket square and had some water when I first got up this morning. These are things that are part of the history. They happen, but no one will remember that. No one really, frankly, cares all that much. I likely won't even remember what I wore today, tomorrow. But there are some elements that we hold up as critical for us to remember. And this is part of the historicity of the stories that we tell. Historicity is what distinguishes in a historic narrative what happened versus what is pure myth. And where we are right now is that we have myth that is being foisted upon us, myth about this country's history, myth about our society's history, trying to supplant fact, trying to supplant what has been reality. I want to give you an example because we certainly see it in very insidious ways, again, the removal of books from libraries and the removal of books from higher education and education curriculums. But I want to give you one that's maybe a little preceded even this set, but has certainly had impact in my own experience. When I came into the community foundation field, and Angie rightfully points out myth about our sector. We're going to dig into that for a little bit here. When I got into the community foundation field, one of the things that that everybody in the field generally does is that there is a class called Community Foundation Excellence Fundamentals. And when we take this class, Community Foundation Excellence Fundamentals, we learn about the history of community foundations. And so I remember going through this class, now 7 years ago. I took mine over at a conference in Buffalo, actually, the New York Funders Alliance conference in Buffalo. And in this session, the session that everybody goes through, what I learned about community foundations is that the short version of a long story is that there was this guy, and he was working at a bank. And while he was working at this bank, a guy named Frederick Goff, there were all these people that had bank accounts, and they were using their bank accounts to support, charitable things in the community. They might have supported food kitchens, or they might have supported, other things that they saw as necessary. One example that they give in the course is feeding trolley car horses. And the classic example is that as we made the transition, community foundations were founded in 1914. As we were making the transition from horses to cars, that all of a sudden horses became less necessary. And the bank was stuck with all these funds as people were passing away or transitioning. They were stuck with these funds. And they said, well, what can we do to get out from underneath these funds? Because every time we want to do something different with these funds, we got to go to court, litigation's expensive, and it's a whole big to do. And so the way the story goes is that Frederick Goff went to the courts, and he says to the courts, this is so expensive. Can we get a group of volunteers together? And if we get these volunteers together, they can help us to choose things that are similar to what a donor initially indicated. They call that variance power in my field, based on a concept called cypre, right? That's what makes a community foundation. Community foundation, we exercise variance power, right? And so according to the story, he got this relief, pulled this group of volunteers together, and voila, in Cleveland in 1914, the first community foundation was born. That's the way the story is told at all these sessions and all these trainings all across the country for decades now. So what's interesting, though, is that a couple of years ago, the Cleveland Foundation, the first of us, was doing some research, and they gathered some information together, and they put out a new paper and subsequent website that described their origin story. A little bit more historicity here, a little different narrative than what I had heard in these sessions. As it turns out, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too deep into this story, but I will encourage you to look up this guy on the left. His name is Mayor Tom Johnson. And I suspect that most people have not heard of Thomas Johnson. Thomas Johnson was the mayor of Cleveland around the turn of the century. And when he was mayor of Cleveland, he had a very fascinating story, kind of a classic American rags to riches kind of tale, had kind of made it, if you will, had accumulated quite a bit of wealth, and was a streetcar, owned a streetcar company. And was many ways a baron of his time. He read a book called Progress and Poverty. And when he reads this book, he was deeply impacted by it and decides that the approaches, the strategies that he's taken to accumulate his wealth have really been harmful to the very things that he thinks are valuable, like other people and human beings and community. And so he decides to devote himself to public service. He runs for Congress in Ohio, wins a term, loses and then wins a term, and then serves, and then decides to run for mayor of Cleveland. He runs for mayor of Cleveland, wins the mayoralty in Cleveland. And when he becomes mayor of Cleveland, starts to use his wealth to create public entities in the city of Cleveland. And so he uses the wealth and says, we're going to buy the folks that do the electric in Cleveland, and we're going to make it, instead of a private interest, part of the public good. He says the people that do refuse pickup and garbage pickup, we're gonna buy that, and we're going to bring that into the public good so that it is co-owned by the community. He says that we are going to get the street rail car company, and we're going to buy that too, and we're going to turn that. And he knew something about this because he had been in this business. We're going to buy that too, and we're going to turn that into the interest of the public good. And what's fascinating is that Frederick Goff, this guy that I referenced as working at a bank, random dude, actually was the attorney that was representing the purchase and sale and conversion of the street railroad car company. It turns out that this cauldron of progressive activity that was Cleveland at the turn of the century had people thinking differently about the relationship between the market economy and the public good. What Frederick Goff actually set out to do, as a contradiction to the story that I heard, a guy working at a bank, stuck with the funds, whatever, was that they were actually creating the Cleveland Trust, which is a new financial entity that was intended to take philanthropy from the province of the very wealthy, the Rockefellers of the world, but to use the same skills, tactics, and tools, but to make that the domain for the public good. The narrative here is a critical one. The historicity here is a critical one because instead of this being about the pecuniary interest of a very small few, this was actually a question of how we build for the public good. There's an article in the New York Times called "How to Save the American Experiment." It was in the Times a few months ago. And it was written by a guy named John Fabian Witt. He's a Yale professor, historian, and he was writing about this same period, a little later in the 1920s. And in the 20s, we had a situation that was dissimilar from much of what we're experiencing today. Encroaching imperialism was certainly a defining characteristic of the early part of the 20th century for this country. Violence, particularly political violence and political polarization, was absolutely a characteristic of this part of American history. Certainly, we know the Tommy guns and expansive violence of the early part of the 20th century. These were all defining characteristics. And while I certainly wouldn't say that the moment that we're in now is, quote, something that we've seen before, history does have this way of echoing itself. And so there are elements despite all this shock and awe that they're trying to foist on us. There are elements about this that we've seen before. What happened in the early part of the 20th century, in the 1920s, in this country, this article chronicles this. I encourage you to take a read. You can even just Google it right now so that you have it on your screen when we're done with this talk, and you can read some more about it. But a guy named Charles Garland created a fund, an American Fund for Public Service. What this fund was about was trying to incubate change. It's trying to incubate folks that were oriented towards building up our social infrastructure, folks that were ready to fight for the commons and the public good. And so from this moment with Garland was born a whole lot of collaboration and different social structure. We saw in the chat here Urban League and the NAACP as well were born out of this era. But not only were they born out of this era and supported, but they came into conversation with some of the things that were happening, for example, in the labor movement. These different configurations, a willingness to experiment, a willingness to incubate change, an eye towards long-term impact, and a deep awareness of social purpose and the public good were the very seeds that were planted that began to push back on the imperialism and the violence and the political polarization that marked the early part of the 20th century. My friends, not only did it start to push back on the worst of those challenges, but this is a book called The Upswing by Bob Putnam and Shaylin Romney Garrett. This book, and I had a chance to hear them speak and chat a little bit with the authors. And I will confess that when I first talked to them, I don't know that I was so convinced until I read the book and started looking at the data. I encourage you to do so as well. That when you chronicle for a series of data points, looking at the economics of this country, politics and political polarization, societal norms, and other cultural questions, what we see is this period towards the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. They've called this the I, we, I curve, where there is a growing awareness that I has to give way to the we in order for us to be able to thrive. And so the seeds, of course, get planted. And it's everybody from Frederick Douglass in our community and Susan B. Anthony to many of the national figures that we all know and have read about, to the institutionalization of that kind of power in the 1930s. And what it inaugurates is a period of spectacular growth that, go figure, if we want a country and a society that is economically viable and growing, that it's the same work that we need to do in our social sector. Planting the seeds, making sure that people are aware of the opportunities for us to come together to figure out the challenges that beset us. I'm going to share with you just a brief video just to give you just a little bit more of the why this is so critical.
For the past 50 years, societies in the West have been dominated by two institutions, the state and the market. The state is us in our collective capacity. The market is us as individuals. And the great debate has been about which is more effective in creating a better future. But what if this entire way of thinking leaves out something essential? Power and wealth are zero-sum games. If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. But now, suppose you decide to share with others not power or wealth, but love, or friendship, or influence. How much do you have left? Not less. You actually have more. That's because love, friendship, and influence are non-zero-sum games. We help our neighbors not because they pay us to, or because the state forces us to, but simply because they're part of the collective us. We can now see why politics in the West have become more divided, abrasive, and extreme. For at least a half-century, we focused on the market and the state, while ignoring the third dimension called society.
Yes, thank you very much. The market and the state at the expense of the third dimension, society. If you'll just allow me to just give you a quick Latin lesson, if you don't mind. Private, privitas, withdrawing from, of self. Public, has to do with the state, the public sector. But social, the Latin there, socius, together, with or with us. Our sector, the area that we work in, the social sector, has to do with the questions of how we live together, of how we share space, of how we share resources, of how we stand up for the people that have been at the margins, the folks that are often forgot about, the folks that end up in a prison in El Salvador, the folks who might end up being restricted to and consigned to a permanent underclass because of a lack of health care and because of being consigned to communities and neighborhoods that have been underinvested. Let's keep in mind, my friends, that this latest episode has been part of an ongoing saga that this country has refused to confront. But our work requires us to confront it. We can't do this the right way, the work of our sector, just by doing nice things. The reason for that is this case that is on your screen. Dartmouth v. Woodard in 1819 was a case that was litigated in the state of Vermont. The governor at the time of the state wanted to take over this higher education institution because he felt that he had a unified theory of executive power. Does that sound familiar? Because there are people that are using that approach today. This unified theory of executive power suggested that because he was the governor, he could control everything in the state. And it turns out that the courts at the time said, actually, that's not how that works. That the sector that we work in, the social sector, what some of us call the nonprofit sector, is a sector that is able to hold its space, that it is in fact distinct even from the public sector, and that we have to find our spine, folks. We got to find our courage to start to fight on behalf of the people and things that we know that are so critical. When we look at these three kind of spheres of influence in our world that are trying to define what the best future is for humanity. Government often exercises its power through force and through regulation, right? And we know that looks like military force or police force, right? That's how government often exercises its force. The private sector often exercises its power through capital accumulation. So in this sector, what power do we have? What do we have at our fingertips? And I want to argue to you that we have the power of the people, that we have the power of morality, but morality not written as one's religious preferences, morality written as how we understand the answer to this question: how shall we live together? Our charge is to be the folks that stand up and are vocal for that answer to that question. And the quick irony here is that so many of us in our sector have found ourselves kind of conveniently positioning ourselves closer to the perceived power of capital or the perceived power of force and regulation, and in many instances at the expense of the proximity that we need towards the people that we actually serve. That was a big part of the Community Foundation narrative, that we're a bank. We're really just a financial institution. That's really what we are, that happens to do this community stuff on the side. I was at a conference and some folks said to me, Simeon, in this crazy moment that we're in, we need to start a movement. And I said to my colleagues in the Community Foundation field, my friends, we are the movement, because we were built to re-intermediate the relationship between the private sector and the social sector. That's the job that we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be the people that stand up on behalf of those that have been marginalized. That's our job. That is who we are. That is what we do. And if we are not inclined to do that well, then we need to look at doing different work. At this point in this sector, we are beyond a moment that we can capitulate. This moment demands urgency from us, because consider the circumstances, consider the stakes, consider what's at play. We're the antidote to what's happening here, folks. We're supposed to be the people that are standing courageously and drawing a line in the sand about what we believe, what is right, and what will make our communities strong and survive, particularly the folks that have been closest to the margins. On Martin Luther King's birthday, our charge is to build the beloved community. And what does Dr. King say about the beloved community? He says our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a qualitative change in our lives. That we got to do this thing on the inside, some soul searching, in order to make a qualitative change in the world that we are occupying. That's our work. That is what we are charged to do. I want to give you just a couple of things, some gems to consider, if you will, as we think about what this actually means in practice. And then we'll get this wrapped up. And I know we've got a wonderful panel that's going to be coming right behind me. Number one, if we're going to do this work, we've got to lead with love. We've got to do it, folks. And love demands that we are curious about one another. Love demands that we are willing to listen to one another. Love demands that while we embrace people, that we hold systems accountable. And I want to encourage, because I know that there's some folks in our community that find every moment, every opportunity possible to take shots at people while not talking about the systems that are at place, or not talking enough about the systems that are at place. I love everybody that is on this call. I know so many of you know me. Our job is to build one another up, to strengthen one another, to hold one another to account in a way that allows us to continue to grow, to create the kind of psychological capital and the kind of psychological safety that allows us to take the kind of risks that we need to build the infrastructure that is going to define the future. If we can't even talk to each other, if we have differences of opinion that lead us to an inability to work together, how do we think that we're going to make progress? We have got to figure out how we lead with love. In our organizations, somebody once said that budgets are a statement of values. In fact, the first place that was noted as being the earliest attribution was in 1991 in Ontario Legislative, up in Canada, our friends up to the north, at a Ontario Legislative Committee finance hearing. There was a testimony, and in that testimony, the person that was testifying said, a budget is a statement of values and priorities. As we consider the work in our organizations, we have to reevaluate what we mean by risk. And when it comes to the budgets, And I'm saying this to all my CFO friends out here who are often the people that say, we can't, it's not possible, we can't innovate, we can't do anything different. We have to say yes to what matters, especially when we know that it is the need that our community is expressing. We got to get closer to our folks, y'all. And we have to spend the resources to do so. And that is certainly a partnership and a collaboration. And I'm saying this publicly on the call so that we could be held to account. We want to drive resources towards how do we find ourselves closer and proximate to the folks that we say that we represent, that we say that we serve. We can't draw actual power to push back on the force of capital and the force of the police state and the way that it's being administered. We cannot draw the power that we need if we are not close to the people that we serve. Heidegger once said, Martin Heidegger, philosopher, said that language is the house in which our being dwells. Language is the house in which our being dwells. The way that we talk, the way that we say, our words often define and shape our reality. I know that folks have had to deal with the risks of a federal government that is willing to step all over the social norms that we have, that is willing to try to erase history. And many of us have had to make some changes, perceived otherwise, in order to make sure that we don't, quote, run afoul of the perceived law. We have to also appreciate that any of those concessions that we make around our language, around the words we use, has the potential to reshape our reality, especially for the generations that are coming behind us. Listen, nobody's naive here. I understand the predicament that many of our organizations are in when you get a letter that says you need to attest that you're not doing anything around diversity or equity or inclusion. I get that. I get that you're trying to get out in front of some of the potential risks that could come your way. I get that. And at least leave some breadcrumbs in the sand. I'm encouraging people, if you're making those changes, put something in place, a policy decision in place that requires you to come back and revisit that decision a year from now, and 2 years from now, and 5 years from now, so that at the very least, we have a chance to push back and go back the other direction. Because what we don't want is that the choices that we make today become our new reality. And all of a sudden, we can't even keep track of the things that we need to be saying in order to stand up on the people that have most been on the margins. Last thing I would say, and then I'll wrap here, is just a little bug in my craw, y'all. It's just something that has just been bothering me. It's been bothering me for a while because, again, language really does matter. And what you say, especially what you say about yourself, can have a big, big impact. I know that for myself, there are times when, I've wanted to get a little fit, get myself to the gym. And if I say to myself, Simeon, oh, you missed it. You're not doing it. You're screwing this up. You're messing up your life. That does not give me the incentive that I need to get up and move. But when I say to myself, you can be strong and you can be fit, and you can be healthy, and you can be there for your children's weddings, and you can be there, right? That's the motivation that I need to get up and to get moving. In our field, we describe ourselves as nonprofits. I want you to know that the Latin root of the word profit translates to progress. So we are the non-progress sector. Is that who we are? Is that who we aspire to be? That we're the people that don't make profit in a society that has largely been driven by capital interests? Talk about a devaluation. Talk about words and language that says, man, listen, go ahead and phone it in. Or try to do this work with one arm tied behind your back. Or you don't need a decent building to do your work in. Or you don't need to be able to market and let people know about the work that you're doing and its importance. Or you need to make sure that you don't pay your staff too much and we can't support overhead. Or we need to make sure that we don't provide the sufficient resources that are necessary. My friends, we are addressing the most intractable challenges that are facing this community and as a sector that are facing humanity. We do not sell widgets. We are not just selling people stuff that they probably don't need. The work that we are doing has value. You have value in your professional life. And it is our time to reassert ourselves. I was in a conversation with someone who said to me, this is a person in our community, a very wealthy person in our community, and we were talking about what's going on in town. And this person said to me, Simeon, I'm going to tell you the real problem in downtown. And I said, my friend, before you tell me, I'm always interested to listen. I'm always interested to hear and learn. So, but before you tell me the real problem in town, can you tell me the last time you were in downtown? Because check this out. We have expertise. We have knowledge. I do not walk into someone's company and try to tell them how they should organize their factory floor or the strategies that they need to be using in their investments, right? That is their business. They have expertise in that space, but we have expertise in our space. It is time for us to lock arms because I also am a realist. I'm a pragmatist. I know we've got to raise these dollars. We've got other things that we've got to do, but we've got to lock arms together to say that as a sector, we will expect different. We are showing up differently. And if there's anybody that's interested in doing that work, we're certainly trying to do it at the Rock Resilience table. We're certainly trying to do it as a community foundation. You are our partners. We are your partner. And if you are ready to lock arms for us to say we are ready to do things differently, all you got to do is just drop us a line at the community foundation, and we are ready to work with you. And with that, happy MLK birthday to everybody. I do hope that you come out Monday morning at 10:30, new time this year. We pushed it back so that you don't have to trudge through the cold and the snow early for MLK Day to support this idea of beloved community and what it means for us to build it here in Rochester, New York. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jerome.
All right. Just take that share down for me. Um, what can I say? You know, over the top good. You know, I'm not surprised. I don't know who is, but I wrote some things down, Simeon. A bunch of things. Like I should just, we're gonna have the recording. That's a question people ask. We're gonna have the recording, but I wrote some things down that I think are jarringly good. And I think if I had to pick most of them, it's sharing love and influence are things that when you give them away, you end up with more.
Right.
Sharing love, power, and influence are things that when you give that away, you end up with more of those things. And certainly the whole idea now, all of us are going to change and our name from not profits to something else. Because when you know better, you're supposed to do better. We're a community action agency, you know. So Simeon, really, 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 I'm gonna ask because again, we have this amazing panel coming up. But before I let you go, brother, and if you feel like you want to stay, if you have time, hang out because you're part of this panel that's coming up. But there's one thing, because with the historicity and the narratives that are out there, there's some people that have a different ideological view of the world. No question, which is why we're here. But we, as you said, we have to live together. What would you suggest, Simeon, as a way to talk to our fellow human beings who have a different ideological perspective that we may?
Yeah. So a couple of things, Strom. Number one, just the term that I've been using lately is either social organizations or social enterprises as a way to describe the work that we do that gives us the validity and the credibility to stand up alongside any company, any business, in part because we're dealing with complexity that would buckle most corporations, the kind of work that we do. And the sophistication with which that's happening, especially here in our community, I can cite some examples. Our celebration of giving recently at the foundation, the talk I gave there was devoted exclusively to this point. As far as engaging with people that have different ideological persuasion or difference, one of the things that has been a hallmark for us lately at the Community Foundation is that we're a regional foundation. We cover an 8-county region, and we realized that we actually had an obligation to do that work more effectively. And I remember that the first time that I was driving out to Medina, which is in our region, and if I'm being honest with you folks, I said, let me check my tire pressure. You know what I'm saying? Let me make sure I'm fully fueled up because I don't want to get stuck out. And when I got out to some of these, to some of the rural communities and started to talk to folks about what actually are the concerns, everybody wanted to make sure that their kids were going to be all right and that we were going to have a better future. We are in a world where there is a regime that forces certain perspectives on us, and we can have a philosophical conversation about why that is the case. But as a practical matter, we got to get with each other, right? We actually need to have the conversation. And this world of social media and scrolling and what that allows us to do is to feel sanctimonious, like we've made our point, without actually engaging real people. I want to encourage us to do that, to actually engage real people. People are entitled to have their perspective and their worldview, right? But we're entitled to be engaged and to put people in the position where they at least have to defend. And what I have learned is that if you get into those conversations, there actually is a lot more that tends to bind people together than leaves us apart, especially when we start to have a conversation about justice. Last thing I'll say on this, in our country, we actually have, in our society, we have a very strong lexicon to talk about community and togetherness. But like you can close your eyes, you can think about we got to come together and the flags waving and apple pie and whatever, right? But what we do not have a strong lexicon for is justice. We've been very clumsy in how we talk about justice. But the beautiful thing is that there are examples around the globe, even to our north up in Canada, truth and reconciliation as an example, that are lessons that we can learn about how we tell the truth, which is why we cannot concede history in this moment, how we tell the truth, and how that leads for an opportunity for reconciliation and healing.
Yeah. And that truth thing, and if you recall, not just you, but all our participants, that in that land acknowledgement, you spent some time researching. One of the lines in
Right.
that is truth is the foundation of good health.
That's right.
Not just the health of us individually, but the health of the collective.
That's
And
right.
truth has to be foundational to that.
Jerome, can I just say you gave such a beautiful, you modeled that so beautifully at the beginning of this session
mm,
when you talked about the engagement that you had with Ronnie, right?
mhm.
And so now there's an opportunity for transmission for learning. And if we walk into conversations willing to learn, okay, and willing to engage with a sense of appreciative inquiry, we have this opportunity to learn to grow, to separate the people from the systems that we have existed in.
Yeah.
Right. And that's so critical for how we structure these conversations and how we engage, while also not being naive about the way that power and capital is being used in our society. Nobody's saying be naive about that. And
Yeah.
the way that racism has played itself out for generations in the use of that capital and the use of that power. And so we have to be honest and tell the truth about that while also
Yes.
creating the pathway to love folks back into the space that we need for us to grow and progress.
Yeah. And there's one question in the chat, and I'll ask it, and it's actually a little bit of a precursor into the panel that's going to come up. It's from Priscilla Birch, and she just anointed you Dr. Banister, but we know that's hereditary, so we'll take that. So I'm quoting here, Dr. Bannister, I love your courage. How did the government shutdown impact your organization?
Yeah, yeah. So, the thing about it is that it's very interesting. I was on a call with a number of foundations, actually. This was a broader foundation called the Council on Foundations. And it was the day that they announced that they were going to weaponize the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Commission, and that people could now call in and like make complaints and whatever. And so, anyways, I'm on this call with a bunch of colleagues, and there is weeping and gnashing of teeth that's happening on this call. I mean, people are just really, distraught and disturbed, and of course, it was a terrible set of circumstances. But then, fortunately, I got a little inspiration and Googled how many cases the EEOC had opened in October of 2024. And that number was about 74,000 open cases that they still had. By the way, this is when Doge was cutting the EEOC's staff by 2/3. And I said to my colleagues, I know that this is a terrifying time and what the signals is awful, but they don't even have enough people to run this down. you know? And so as we think about practically about how we underestimate, how we understand risk, we have to be sure that we don't overestimate the risk. And so for us at the Community Foundation, that's what I've been trying to do with our team. We did two things at the beginning of this year. The first thing we did is we had a conversation about our values. What do we believe as a community foundation? Right? We have been saying a lot of stuff. Do we believe it? Because now it's going to get put to the test. And fortunately, our board has been alongside. I've felt all the support, certainly that I need, and our team has felt the support that we need to be able to stay the course. Because we know that practically this stuff works. When we're talking about equity, when we're talking about the investments that we need to make as a community so that we have a vibrant future, this isn't, pie in the sky stuff that we're making up out of thin air. We know that it works. And there's so many examples, not the least of which was that when we invested in children and families during the pandemic, we significantly closed the poverty gap. So we know the stuff that works. The question is, do we actually have the will, and are we willing to make a point? And I actually think that now's the time for us as a sector to stand up and to say, we actually do have a point to be made, and we understand it. Many of us have private interests, right? So we get that people want to make money and have a good life. And I don't, we need all these sectors, the private sector, the public sector, the social sector, but they are intended to keep one another in tension with each other, right? And so if we don't take up our side of the bargain here, then it creates a situation where the private sector and public sector can run amok, and that's what we're living in right now. It's time for us to assert ourselves.
Appreciate. Well, with that, thank you again, dear brother. Thank you for even going extra innings with us.